Martell on, who many of you would probably recognize from Ancient Aliens. I've seen every single episode of that show. I sort of have a love-him, hate-him relationship with that show, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that with Jason tonight as to why that's the case. He is apparently on the line. I see area code 949. We will get him on shortly. But first, as usual, for the next 5 to 10 minutes, we will cover the news, courtesy of Alex Jones and Company at InfoWars. First article here. Armed Texans to march at South by Southwest. March begins at high noon on Wednesday, March 12th, at a location to be announced in downtown Austin. Well, let me make it clear to you folks. I've said it a zillion times. If we lose the Second Amendment right to bear arms, we lose everything. Extraterrestrial contactee Alex Collier said that his Andromeda contacts told him, tell your fellow Americans if they lose the Second Amendment, they lose everything. So while the ETs may not believe in using violence to escalate violence, they understand that we need guns to protect ourselves from tyrannical government. And this armed Texan march makes it clear that the right to bear arms does give you open carry rights. Next article here. Russia threatens to impose sanctions on U.S. corporations, thus removing wind from the sails of Obama, Kerry, and Congress as they call for sanctions on Russia. Well, Russia and America are not enemies. The politicians in both those countries are controlled by the same forces who want a one world order. And this war between Russia and the U.S. in regards to sanctions, I'm not so exactly sure what the New World Order thinks about this. Some might see it as a blessing, some might see it as a problem, because it can maintain the illusion, but at the same time, the illusion that America and Russia are enemies, but at the same time, it can cause problems for the New World Order. So we need to see how this plays out. CBS journalist resigns after being pressured over anti-Obama reporting. Well, that's the mainstream media for you. They take freedom of speech to a joke. It's you write what you're told, and if you don't write what you're told, you lose your job. There is a video on the UFO TV Studios channel. I don't remember the guy who did the presentation, but there's actually 2 videos of the same presentation because he was at 2 conferences talking about why the mainstream media will not report stuff on extraterrestrials and UFOs, and he talked all about how the media follows a you write what you're told policy, and if you don't, you lose your job. In this case, it's about the government. Next article here, Rand Paul is definitely preparing a presidential run. Well, Rand Paul may not be the president that his father Ron was, and let me make it clear, Ron Paul should be our president. Mitt Romney won the Republican primary because Ron Paul was victimized by massive voter fraud, and if Ron Paul had won the primary as he should have, he would have crushed Obama. That's the electronic voting for you. And don't get me started on how Mitt Romney should have won the election, but Obama did because it was voter fraud because they wanted Obama as their puppet of choice. But Rand Paul, there are a few exceptions where he's not a truly people president, as every politician in government should be, because the one purpose of government was to exert by any force necessary to protect the rights and property of every person under the auspices of that government. And Rand Paul, he would certainly make a great president, but you can bet they try to keep him out of there. Next article, doctors in the UK forced to become state snitches to spot radical patients, radical in quotation marks. I don't know what to make of this. It's one of those see something, say something things. If you see something suspicious, no matter how trivial, rat them out. People, they want to put you in a state of fear. Don't let them do that to you. Connecticut cop, I will kick down doors to confiscate guns. Okay, someone get that cop fired. Cops are supposed to keep the peace, and he's got a gun himself, doesn't he? Pretty hypocritical, if you ask me. What's next here? Blackwater mercenaries reported to Donetsk, I think that's how it's pronounced, Donetsk, Ukraine. Russian counterpart, I'm not going to bother trying to pronounce the Russian name here, appeared in Crimea after coup. Well, I just hope the people of Ukraine realize that they should keep the IMF out of there. They should keep the EU out of the Ukraine. That's stepping stone to global government, and we don't want that. And next article, report, Russia moves anti-ship missiles to Crimea. Moscow responds to USS Truxtun being sent to Black Sea. I'm just going to make it very clear. I don't want any sort of a war. Let's just try to keep the peace, shall we? Because that's what government is supposed to do, keep the peace. That's the one job of cops, keep the peace. Well, I think I've covered news enough. So, without further ado, I am going to I think this is Jason. Jason, area code 949, is that you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I am calling from this planet at 949 area code.
It's great to be speaking to you, and the fact that the show was canceled for a couple of nights was a blessing in disguise, because now we can do a 2-hour show because you're feeling better. So
yes,
we should
sir.
we should breathe a sigh of relief on that one. By the way, before we start talking about extraterrestrials, there was a show on Discovery Channel in 2006, I think it was, called Did Aliens Build the Pyramids? They said on that show you ran a dating agency. Do you still run that?
That was completely inaccurate information.
Oh, why don't you tell us why they lied about you?
Well, because it was a skeptic show from the beginning. Unfortunately, everything that they revealed in the show as far as the facts were wrong, including that. I, at the time, was an employee of a dating company.
Oh, well, that's television for you.
That show was one of the typical justifications for let's put a show on about UFOs and then pretty much come to no conclusion other than to say these people are all idiots. Thankfully, shows, as you mentioned in the opening, shows like Ancient Aliens are sparking a bigger interest by looking at it from at least a plausible scenario and not trying to just throw tomatoes at the idea and do a show around it.
Yeah, it's true. I'll get into why I have, like I said, a love and hate relationship with the show Ancient Aliens. But I think it's best we start the show off with a bang. And I'm going to need to speak for about 5 to 7 minutes here to get into everything in regard to this controversial issue. And then I'm going to give you the floor to plead your case. But
what's the controversial issue, just so I'm curious?
The accuracy of Zecharia Sitchin's work. I'm sure you've heard about this because you believe him, and I believe him too. I do believe he was accurate with a couple of exceptions, which I will get into. I'm going to, hopefully I'll try to make this as quickly as possible, but I'm going to give you the floor after this to plead your case. I believe...
Oh, take your time.
Okay, I believe...
But just remember, my name's not Zecharia Sitchin, but feel free to go ahead.
Oh, did I call you that by accident?
No, but I might support someone else's research and will be happy to hit any points, negative or positive, you bring up. My point being that I might support someone's research, but I have my own line of research, and it's not like following Zecharia Sitchin every note and key.
Right. I can understand
that.
But in regards to why I believe he was accurate, Andrew Bartzis, galactic historian and Akashic Records reader. People say just because someone says it doesn't mean it's true. Well, that's not the case with Andrew Bartzis because he's an Akashic Records reader who reads the Akashic for the purposes of galactic history. And he made a statement in part 2 of a 20-part series that you can find on the Creating 5D YouTube channel. And that statement that he made that revolutionizes the way we look at human history on planet Earth was Zecharia Sitchin's first 3 books are extremely accurate. He did say that the 4th book and onward, Sitchin did screw up his timelines. And he also said that Sitchin was a very spiritual man who had an angel of sorts helping him write his first 3 books. And he did say that Sitchin was inaccurate when the Annunaki, when he said the Annunaki came on a mission. They were actually lured to Earth and their planet Nibiru, which has its own consciousness, and that's why they can survive on Nibiru, even though it's so far from the sun, because every planet has its own consciousness filtering system. But the point is, they were actually lured to Earth by higher dimensional entities, and the gold that they had humans mine after they genetically engineered humans was not to shield the atmosphere of their planet Nibiru, it was so they could bring other entities back to Earth who cherished the gold for some reason. But even though Andrew Bartzis did say this, there are people who are not going to believe what he said, and I'm going to get into why. First of all, Leo Zagami, a former 33rd degree Freemason turned whistleblower, said on his Project Camelot interview that Sitchin was an Illuminati disinformation agent and the Vatican helped him write his work, and even said the Pope instructed him to write his End of Days book. And in David Icke's 1999 documentary, Revelations of a Mother Goddess, Arizona Wilder, a former Illuminati mind-controlled slave of the Illuminati, she said that she saw Sitchin at satanic Illuminati rituals. She actually said he was a shape-shifting reptilian alien who had the job of disinforming about the reptilian aliens and the Illuminati. And the icing on the cake there was David Icke said, well, that might explain why Sitchin warned me never to say anything about the reptilian aliens in my work after I asked him why he never said anything about ancient Sumer's countless reptilian motifs in his work. And Alfred Weber of Exopolitics TV, he did an interview with this guy, Donnie Gilson, who's been studying the whole Planet X thing, and they talked about how Sitchin was a CIA operative. And here in this article I have in front of me from Alfred Weber's Exopolitics site titled "The 2012-2013 Nibiru Flyby Meme Hoax, Did Zachariah Sitchin Cooperate with U.S. Intelligence in Setting Up the 2003 Invasion of Iraq and the 2013 Nibiru Flyby Meme," it talks about how Sitchin, his translations were made by tablets that don't even exist. It says in that article the whole 2012-2013 Nibiru Flyby was a hoax that he made up as part of a way to get humanity in a state of fear, as part of the New World Order's agenda to impose global totalitarian government. And they do mention Michael Heiser of Sitchin is wrong. He's a prominent Sitchin discreditor, so to speak, talking about how Sitchin never even had any training in the Sumerian language or attended any college class for even one semester. He's not a language expert at all. And the U.S. Department of Defense says he relied on Mr. Sitchin's advice in planning and carrying out the invasion of Iraq, and Sitchin reportedly visited the Pentagon for consultations. Well, I was able to meet Andrew Bartzis at the Return to Atlantis conference in Sarasota, Florida a few months ago, and I brought some of this stuff to his attention, and I asked him, could you please explain to me how Sitchin could have been accurate if he was literally a reptilian disinformer? And Andrew Bartzis explained to me that what all these people who say that Sitchin was wrong, their information was implanted into this reality by extraterrestrial entities known as timeline watchers who, in order to further a malevolent or a benevolent agenda, will implant things in this reality, in this timeline, in the media, TV, and books and other sources, and they did not want people to know Sitchin was right, so they implanted all this false stuff into this reality, into this timeline. How exactly they do that would probably take a whole show to discuss, but that's Andrew Bartzis' explanation to say that Sitchin was accurate after all. Well, Jason, now that I've explained all this, you've got the floor. Why do you believe Sitchin was right for the most part?
The only name that I heard in that eloquent speech was the name Zachariah Sitchin that I recognized. I'm going to speak at a little bit of a different pace, and I'm going to use sources that people can Google and I guess probably look up. But let me start by playing a clip of Zachariah explaining his view on the 12th planet and how it relates to the year 2012 or 2003 or any of these predicted dates. Let's see if I can do this properly.
Take your time.
Found this little old clip.
Those who refer to this planet by its Sumerian name, the Nibiru, picked it up from my books because there's nobody else before me who said the Sumerians knew of all these planets, including one more called Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. And all the speculation when is this 3600 period bringing it to our vicinity. And now I understand that there's some speculation not coming from me. I must stress it again and again. I'm not involved in that. The crucial year will be 2003, when Nibiru will be back and will cause this and will cause that. And all I can say, Nibiru will not be back in 2003.
So there's been a repeating pattern since then. I've been in this research, Andrew, for almost 20 years now. And everything that you just mentioned are people and names and things that probably came on the scene maybe, I don't know, a year, maybe 2 or 3 ago. Sitchin did 50 years of research, 50. And unfortunately, people just really don't understand what they're talking about when they hear the name Zachariah Sitchin and then read someone's blog or post, but never actually read his books or have any idea what the term ancient astronaut theory might really mean. So what I can do for you and your audience is to give you some of the things that first sparked my interest into how I got onto the path that I am. And of course, Zachariah Sitchin and Eric von Daniken both played crucial roles that to this day have extremely accurate and relevant information. But like any theory, everything evolves over time.
Yeah, everybody's going to debate this. And even Marcia Schaefer, I forgot to mention this, Marcia Schaefer is an extraterrestrial contactee. She said that her ET contacts who were benevolent told her to look at the work of Zachariah Sitchin. And I discussed this with her on her show, and she told me, Andrew, nobody knows what actually happened in regards to the work that Sitchin did. My ET contacts even told me Sitchin was accurate, but in the end, he was wrong. I'm just going to guess that those things that Andrew Bartis, the Akashic Records reader who I mentioned, said about the Anunnaki not mining gold for their planet's atmosphere, and also they were lured to Earth, those were probably maybe the couple of things that he was wrong about. And he also said it was more like 480,000 years ago, not 450,000. But people can make of this whatever they will. Yeah?
Listen, I don't know of any book on the planet that's accurate. Look at our Bible. Look at any text that you want, even a book on equations. There are flaws. So I would never say, and I don't think anyone would say that Sitchin was accurate, 100%. No one is. That's not possible. Only God could be accurate. So the information that's in Sitchin in his books, I think is interesting from a certain perspective that it sounds like your audience is probably well-versed in terms like, Danica and Sitchin. So here's a little bit of food for thought, battling skeptics and the like. There's two tracks of evidence to look at for the ancient astronaut theory. There's the pictorial evidence, the visual evidence, and then there's the text, the written word, the different Semitic languages of the Bible being translated into this, into that, to Hebrew, to English, Old Testament, New Testament. So you have people battling Sitchin, as an example, at a linguistic point of view, meaning his translations of these phrases and words are wrong. Well, that's where I, have an issue with skeptics who say that, because are they a linguist? Do they actually translate cuneiform script directly? Probably not. That's where Sitchin had his focus, was on the translation of the word from Hebrew to, Akkadian, all the way back to Sumerian. So he was the master of the word and really knew how to look at these various tales across several different cultures and see how it was the same story kind of spidering out to everyone. Now, the other side to that, Andrew, is the visual evidence, and that's von Daniken. Daniken saw ancient astronaut theory all over the planet. And, of course, we can discuss those visuals because I'm more of a visual guy myself. However, I always understood and respected the word, the linguistic understandings of Sitchin, and combined it with the visuals of von Daniken. And with those two researchers alone, anyone who chooses to dive deep, they come up realizing probably what most of us who are fans of these topics do. Something interesting has been happening in our past.
Yeah, there's no question about it that Stone Age chisels could not have done what was done in the past. By the way, in regards to the stuff I mentioned about critics of Sitchin saying he has no formal training, that contradicts what Stanton Friedman, UFO researcher, told me when I had him on his show, because he and Sitchin were colleagues since they both presented at the same conferences, and he straight up told me that Sitchin was unique in that he was a scholar in the research he was doing. So that's all the more reason why I think this stuff that critics say about Sitchin not having any formal training is an outright lie. But since we've covered the subject of Nibiru and the Anunnaki, well, actually, one more thing about the Anunnaki. In your research, have you uncovered
We haven't covered those topics yet.
Yeah, I know. But the thing about the Anunnaki, I have heard that the Anunnaki from Nibiru, they're actually one of several different races of extraterrestrials on Nibiru. The guy that said that was Tolek, who's the contactee for the Andromeda Council. He said that his ET contacts told him that. And the Anunnaki on Nibiru are just one of many different races of Anunnaki, because according to George Kavaslis, who's an ET contactee from Australia, who I had on my show, he said the term Anunnaki refers to a hodgepodge of different ET races who are the son of a universal entity known as Anu, who can be thought of as a universal geneticist of sorts. Have you covered anything in your research that suggests that there is more than one Anunnaki?
I can't use any of those type of sources that you just mentioned there, because they need to be pieces of physical evidence here on Earth, like artifacts or written texts. So from that database of knowledge, no, there's pretty much only one type of a depiction for Anunnaki, male and female. They have certain headdresses depending on whether they're in charge of a spaceport or a higher god. But, you know, when we get into, like, some of these more esoteric ideas of the Anunnaki and their daily lives and principles of thinking, you know, I tend to shy away from that because it's extremely hard to verify. I know Zecharia Sitchin is an example, going back to Sitchin. He wrote a book called The Lost Book of Enki, where what he did was compiled from various Assyrian and Sumerian and, you know, these actual tablets. He recompiled information that was written down by a Sumerian scribe with a high priest while they sat in front of one of these beings called an Anunnaki. Now, if there were several different kinds and such, why not? I mean, we have that on Earth. There's different races, but I can't speak to those type of points. What I could probably do, and if you're okay with this, Andrew, is I could kind of just quickly take you through how I got up to topics of interest like the Anunnaki and Sitchin and stuff like that. But I realize you attack these topics from probably a different angle than I'm going to, which is fine for us to kind of ping-pong back and forth from our views.
All right, yeah, go right ahead. You got the floor, and if I hear anything interesting, I'll jot it down on my notepad here, and we'll talk about it later in greater detail.
Cool. All right. So, yeah, you know, I just turned 40 a couple weeks ago and started my research when I was 21. Someone in college had mentioned to me about a face and pyramids on the surface of Mars, and I was just a waiter, you know, going to college, surfer, living in San Diego. And I was like, face and pyramids, what? Whatever. And for some reason, I was just very intrigued by this topic. And so they had just started turning on the internet, and I used my college, like, dial-up account to get onto the internet. And somehow, for whatever reason, I got turned on to things called the Freedom of Information Act. And then started to Google things like NASA and Jet Propulsion Laboratories and Goddard Space Center. And what I found was that the principal photographer in charge of putting cameras on the orbiters and landers that we send to Mars was a company called Malin Space Science Systems, which just happened to be located in San Diego, where I was going to college. So I went, okay, well, I'll take this a step further. I'm just a layman, face on Mars. So I called Dr. Mike Malin. It took me a few times, but I finally got him on the phone. And I said, Dr. Malin, look, I'm a college student, you know. Is this really like a face and pyramids on Mars? And he said, no. These are all natural sand and weather-eroded objects. There's nothing artificial to see there. I thanked him and hung up, continued to look into the topic, and I found 4 or 5 peer-level review scientists, meaning that they had the same credentials of Dr. Mike Malin, but they didn't work at NASA. However, a couple of these gentlemen had published materials about the surface structures of Mars. One guy in particular, a Dr. Mark Carlotto. Excuse me. So this is where it got kind of interesting for me, Andrew, is because Dr. Carlotto essentially was writing mathematical algorithms to look at satellite telemetry over Russia. You know, pictures we snap over Russia. He'd run his algorithm and it'd say, oh, look, those are tanks and troops and, you know, some other military complex being covered up or shrouded by the debris or a tarp or something, right? His mathematical algorithms, this fractal analysis is what he called it, would identify artificiality in satellite telemetry. Well, when Dr. Carlotto ran his fractal analysis on Cydonia, the face and pyramids came out to be 98% probability to be artificial. NASA never did anything like that. They just kind of quickly said, oh, it's nothing. So that really sparked my interest initially. I'm going to kind of move on to off Mars here. But that's what really sparked me initially, Andrew. I was like, wait a minute, what the heck is this? Something's going on. So I started to realize that we have things all over the Earth here, let alone on Mars. This is another planet here. There's pyramids and megalithic structures. I started to want to know, where do we really come from? And that kind of led me into the quest of looking into the most ancient cultures that we have here on Earth. I mean, where does it start? And on our textbooks now, I mean, if you ask a college professor or some type of academic, they'd say, well, Sumer, Babylon, Mesopotamia, 3800 BC is where our civilization started here on Earth. So that's where I started, and such forth, you know, brings this information about the Sumerian culture, which really starts to get interesting, Andrew, because I was raised as a Christian on the Bible and Jesus and angels, and I never really connected with my higher power in the church, where people were raising their hands and somehow like talking in tongues, and they seemed to be connecting to something that I didn't get. But later in life, now I look at this information, and when I got to the Sumerian topic and some of these things that we'll talk about, that's what really started to spark my initial interest. I'll pause for a moment, though, because I don't want to just talk forever here.
Yeah, just had to get myself off mute there. If you ever hear me take a few seconds, that's because I'm getting off mute. But you mentioned Mars. I do want to talk about that because I saw some stuff on Mars on your website, and when you appeared on Ancient Aliens, you've talked about it before. Since you mentioned Cydonia, I have no doubt that that thing was created artificially. Richard C. Hoagland, give him a lot of credit for exposing that information about how the mathematical precision of Cydonia makes it so in-your-face obvious that it was created artificially. And one thing, though, about Richard Hoagland, since I mentioned him, that's why I have a love-him-hate-him relationship with him, is because he has tried to demonize and discredit anybody who talks about a secret space program on Mars involving extraterrestrials. And before we talk about that, I want to bring up, there was an episode made on TV, on the True TV channel, of a show that was created by Bill Ryan and Kerry Cassidy, who are the people behind the Project Camelot program. This show this show was about Mars. It was supposed to be a pilot in a series, but the show got canceled after this one episode. I wonder why. They were probably going to expose a lot of stuff that people didn't want the general public to know about. But the point is, this episode about Mars, they exposed very secretive occult stuff about it. First of all, they talked about how the sky on Mars is actually a baby blue color. They talked about how the surface on Mars is not the red color that we're told. It more closely resembles the desert of Arizona. They also talked about how the surface of Mars, you can stand on it without a spacesuit. It would be a little harder to breathe, but you would not pass out from suffocation, and you would not suffer from too many cosmic rays because the atmosphere is strong enough to protect you. And Andrew Bashago, who's a whistleblower in the government, he said that he was taken up there as part of a space program, and President Obama was allegedly part of this space program. And this episode of Project Camelot didn't air until after Obama was elected president, even though it was supposed to air beforehand. Kind of makes you wonder if they were trying to keep that from the public. But in regards to your research on Mars, can you verify all this stuff I've said about Mars, and also talk about what you know about Mars from your research?
You know, I can't verify anything that you said there, unfortunately, my friend, but Mars and Obama, I couldn't even put into the same sentence. But what I can do is agree with you that yes, there is some type of cover-up with Mars, and there is probably a space mission not on the public radar that's been going to Mars for quite some time. I personally believe that, and I have a couple analogies. First one is, you know, we landed a man on the moon in 1969. It's like Intel built that Pentium chip, you know, the Pentium. I got my first Pentium computer, and it was 75 megahertz. I think today they're like 2400, 2.4 gigahertz, right? They're exponentially higher. Us landing a man on the moon is like Pentium creating the 75 megahertz chip and going, we did it. We created the Pentium. We're good. You know, no. We landed a man on the moon. You think we stopped doing that? It's not logical that we would keep doing that. So, in my opinion, that we've probably been going space under the classification of the Department of Defense or whatever for quite a bit of time. And it's an interesting thing, too, to look at the instrumentation that we have currently deployed on our packages that are on Mars. There's a political backup, Andrew, meaning some guy's been working at NASA for 16 years as an engineer building an arm that's going to deploy onto the Pathfinder or, you know, the Curiosity. And the instrumentation of this arm is going to have probably a high-resolution camera, a little thing to dig into a rock and scoop out a sample. It doesn't have anything on there. There is no instrumentation being deployed to confirm life. There isn't a thing that's going to, like, scoop up a sample of a microbe. There is no detection tool to say, we did it, we've confirmed life. We have only the tools to detect life. So we have a political backup of the tools we're deploying to actually confirm if life exists. Now, the caveat to that is if anyone's paying attention, if anyone logs into Malin Space Science Systems, they still control 90% of the imagery from the surface and the orbiters going around, JPL and Malin. These are all publicly accessible images for the most part, and the ones that they're releasing, just the public images alone, you see what appear to be lakes and bushes, flowing water on the surface of Mars, specifically in an area called the Gusev crater. We're very interested in this area. It's an old ancient ocean. Europe has a color satellite. It's called the ESA. All the images that we snapped from NASA and the Mars Global Surveyor and a couple others that we have going around Mars. Mars Global Surveyor is actually, I don't even know if that's still in commission, forgive me. There's been a few that we've sent. Most of NASA's imagery that they release publicly is black and white. ESA, the European Space Agency, releases color data. And so if you look at the Gusev crater from the ESA photographs, it looks like a big forest. I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but if anyone actually chooses to look at this, yes, to go back to your original comments, Andrew, the surface of Mars does not look like a barren red planet. We use a camera lens that takes a bigger spectrum of light, more into the red. It captures more spectrum of light than the human eye can see. If you process any of the images for the human eye, it's a nice blue sky on Mars. You combine that with what we're seeing that looks like vegetation and flowing water, everything they're going to continue to tell us is going to be in this direction. I can almost like do a lottery of, you know, hey, when's life going to be predicted on Mars? If you pay attention, they're going to continue to tell you that all the signs for life are there. They just don't have any tools yet in place to confirm it.
Yes, thanks for giving us your take on that. We've been sending people to Mars a lot longer than, well, we say we never landed man on Mars, but I have no doubt that that's a lie. But speaking of landing on planets, the moon landing, you mentioned it. Now, my understanding of the moon landing, I'm sure people are going to doubt what I'm going to say, but my understanding of the moon landings is, yes, we did go to the moon. Yes, we did have extraterrestrials help us go to the moon, but the videos that we saw were faked videos, and they had to fake the videos because if they showed the real footage of them being on the moon, well, there goes the extraterrestrial cover-up. Two things I want to point out here. In his Project Camelot interview, John Lear, UFO whistleblower, he held up a picture that showed that the sky on the moon is actually a saffron yellow color, and he also said that some remote viewers did try to remote view Apollo 11, the Sea of Tranquility, at the time that it landed there, and they found nothing. So what's your take on the idea, yeah, we did go to the moon, but we faked the video footage to conceal the extraterrestrial cover-up?
Well, 2 points there. Big fan of John Lear. I'd like to go meet him one day. I am in light communication with him, but, you know, he's in Vegas and I'm in California. And I've paid attention to Lear for a long time. And, you know, he came out very remarkable topics. One was Bob Lazar, which I'm going to pass on that topic for now, but his big story. And then the second was, yeah, all this weird esoteric knowledge of what we're doing in space, that there's an actual machine on the moon that processes human souls, stuff like that. You know, I'm like, whoa, that's hard to process those type of topics, but that's on record from John Lear. Yes, I definitely respect his opinion. You know, and as far as what we're doing, you know, in space in general, I think that the moon is definitely, if anyone pays attention to the astronauts we've sent to the moon, the initial astronauts were up there in their little, like, tricycle or this little, you know, four-wheeled buggy, and there are quotes from them saying, why do you send us here in tricycles when the military is here in Ferraris? They clearly saw something going on the moon, and were told, from what I understand, you don't belong here. And the whole dark side of the moon is possibly some type of concealed base. I don't know if the images were faked or not, Andrew. I think there's enough science in those photos from an image analysis point of view to see a lot of weird shadows and things that bring up those type of questions. But then some of the images do appear to have either lights that are UFOs or possibly, like you said, if it's a fake, then it's a studio light above them. I can't answer that. I do honestly think, though, that we have gone to the moon. To what extent we're using it now, I just don't know.
Well, other things that many people say they won't know about the moon or don't want to know about the moon. I've discovered people don't want to know about this. I've tried to talk about it before, but hopefully you'll be willing to discuss it. Many people don't want to talk about it because the idea of it is too frightening, and it's one of those can't handle the truth kind of things. But I'm going to tell you a little backstory, and then we'll get into this. Alex Collier, ET contactee, he said that after Richard Hoagland gave his Cydonia presentation, he got up to Richard Hoagland in his face and said, "Richard, why won't you tell the world that the moon is artificial?" And Richard Hoagland said, "I'm not ready to." Well, that's what Alex said his response was. I am 100% convinced the moon is artificial, but we're not here to talk about why I believe that. Do you believe that? And if so, what's the science behind it? What's your take on the moon being artificial?
You know, I don't know if it's artificial or not, but if we look at an analysis of other moonlets, for instance, Mars, Phobos and Deimos, the satellites that Russia sent over to Mars as well, you know, to do their analysis, Phobos 1 and Phobos 2, they had this interaction with the main Mars moonlet, Phobos, and you can Google it too. There's the last satellite frame that the Phobos satellite, you know, from Russia picks up before going offline is the satellite, the Russian satellite Phobos, comes up to the main moon of Mars and starts to ping it with radar, and the last frame that it captures on camera is this beam of light. I mean, it literally looks like a laser beam, and it's not coming from our satellite. It's coming from the moonlet of Mars, and it disabled the Russian satellite. They even have surface imagery of using infrared of what appears to be a long, elongated shape. I mean, it looks like the shadow of a UFO. Think of it that way. It's the shadow of a humongous UFO, but they only see it because they're looking in infrared. It's not on the surface. So we definitely caught some interesting things with Russian satellite telemetry looking at Mars, and you know, there's an interesting video that I can't buy a copy of. I'd love to find a copy. I'd pay money to have this thing. And you can Google it and still find information. I have a web page on my site, but none of the videos work anymore. It's called Alternative 3. And Alternative 3 was a video produced out of Britain about 20 years ago, which is very well done, and it goes to the extreme of even showing a Russian color landing on Mars. The whole video is done under a tone of like, you know, we're interviewing people. It's kind of like Camelot, but like a reality TV series around Camelot interviews. It's really cool. Alternative 3. Now, you can't find it anywhere, but it postulated that, you know, the Mars was being landed on by the Russians in 1963. And in the video, they're like, look, there's life. You see something like moving outside the window of the lander. So, you know, I'm definitely of the opinion, Andrew, that we've had an extensive space program, and NASA is a public space agency, but the private space agency is not something the public is still made to know, and they're not supposed to know anything about it still.
Yes, and I often use something that I borrowed from you, and every time I say it, I always say, by the way, I borrowed this from Jason Martell. NASA should stand for not always a straight answer. You said that on that Did Aliens Build the Pyramids thing, and I've said that before when I talk about NASA, and I always make sure to give you credit on that one because that's the right thing to do. But
well, here, I got another one for you, but it's a little bit faster.
Is it SETI should stand for a silly effort to investigate?
That's good.
That's Stan Friedman.
That's yeah. Well, wow. That's okay.
But yeah, because all they do is measure. Okay, you go ahead. Go ahead. What do we?
No, mine's a little longer. The resistance to a new idea will always be increased by the square root of its importance. Meaning the square root, you get down to the essentials. The square root of its importance. Yeah. So kind of a heavy one there, but
yeah.
Okay.
But moving on. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Moving on. Well, I think we were talking lastly about Mars, so I'd probably like to just kind of continue here in where I left off in saying that as I shift my focus from Mars, I started to realize that there were structures here all over the Earth. And that's what kind of sparked my initial interest into the Sumerian culture. And looking into this information from an academic level, I then quickly, found Zecharia Sitchin as an alternative view that brought forth, a much more detailed view of some of these texts. So I then started to, look into this further on my own outside of Zecharia Sitchin, and I ended up hiring a professional antiquities photographer and had him go to the British Museum, the Louvre, a couple other locations. And you can't film a lot of these private collections unless you're, like a professional of some sort that handles antiquities. And this gentleman I happened to come in contact with allowed me to hire him and get access to these. And so I actually have the largest Sumerian archive of images online to this day. If you type in Sumerian artifacts, you get my collection. So I took a very personal interest in looking at the imagery of these artifacts because two things. Just like Egyptian hieroglyphics, a lot of the Sumerian visuals are like acronyms. When we look at a specific hieroglyph in Egyptian writing, that hieroglyph actually stands for an acronym like CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, or FYI, for your information. We can't look at a syllable, we can't look at a symbol as one syllable. Most of the symbols in these pictograms and hieroglyphic information, each symbol represents several words. A picture is 1,000 words. That phrase means something for a reason. These pictograms and hieroglyphics that we have are a key important part of deciphering the ancient astronaut theory. I do not translate any language. I'm ashamed to say that I'm learning Spanish. The only language I know is English. However, when it comes to the pictograms and visual information, I can show you how the same symbol is being used by a remote tribe in Africa, the Dogon tribe, using the same symbolic hieroglyphs as Egypt in the same time frame. So it's a very interesting tool to understand, if you choose to, the linguistic side and fight the scholarly translation of the word, which most people don't have a clue of what they're saying that are skeptics in that side. Or you can take the easier approach of just the visual analysis of symbols and hieroglyphics. The Sumerian information presents a very well-documented symbology of representing pieces of information, things like Nibiru, planet Earth, the Annunaki. And the thing that's interesting about the Sumerian information is the fact that they really left us two forms of data. They left us written texts, where what they did was they wrote most of their texts in clay tablets, kind of like a semi-wet clay. They'd use something that looked like an oversized screwdriver and would turn it and twist it. And this was a scribe. Not everybody could read and write Sumerian. You were a scribe if you had the skill in that time, 6,000 years ago, to write cuneiform script, the language of the Sumerians. So they wrote on these clay tablets and then would stick a clay tablet into a kiln, a primitive stove, and would turn it into stone, keying that phrase, writing in stone. And so as an early Christian, for me, I became aware, just from an academic level, that we have artifacts and written texts that are telling the exact biblical tale written in the King James Version of the Bible, but it's recorded in stone, 4,000 years before the Bible, unchanged. This really started to blow my hair back. So I went deeper and found, like Zecharia Sitchin, and as I mentioned, started to look at things from a well-encompassed view, not just the Christian view. And it was a difficult path to take, but doing so allowed me to realize that the depth of information that I'm personally uncovering and for myself discovering did nothing but verify and further uphold the biblical veracity, meaning these aren't just tales. Maybe these people that are in church don't really realize the veracity of what happened. It's not a myth. These things actually happened. So it gets really interesting in the fact that the Sumerians have this written language. They also had a form of pictograms. They had these things called cylinder seals, where they would reverse carve images onto a circular stone. They still don't know how they did that today, reverse carve these perfect images, so that when you'd roll it over wet clay, it would leave the positive imprint. And so they would disseminate pictograms with written word throughout their daily lives of, you know, exchange for, I'm going to buy your goat for a barrel of oats or something, right? So they recorded all their daily transactions. They were the first ones to have mathematics and agriculture and kingship and schools and courts and laws and judges. Literally, even to this day, we attribute over 100 of the firsts for a civilization needed comes right out of the Stone Age, pops up in Sumer. So for me, Andrew, you know, I really started to become fascinated with another part of the writings that they had. Again, at the academic level, we could confirm what the Sumerians were saying, their mathematics, agriculture, and their astronomy, their motion, their movements and knowledge of the planets, knowing that the sun is in the center, even knowing the distance between the planets. We're going to talk about that further in a moment when we talk about Nibiru and Planet X, but I want to stress that the academic acceptance of the Sumerian knowledge for accuracy, for recording astronomical events over hundreds of years. It was sacred information that was written down and only understood by high priests in Sumer. We see this kind of play out in that Mel Gibson movie, Apocalypto. You might have to remember, but there was one scene where the priest looks over at the king and kind of nods. The solar eclipse is about to happen. Do your thing, you know. The high priests in ancient times recorded and knew about astronomical data. So the precipice of all of this, Andrew, is that the Sumerians had very accurate information that we can confirm by our academic means of looking into our history. But there is a line drawn in the dirt. They also speak of a time and are very clear. If you were to ask a Sumerian, how do you know all of this? They say, well, everything we know we were taught by the Annunaki, and that term means those who from heaven come to earth. I'll pause there for a minute and let you ask a couple questions.
Yes, you say you want to get back to Nibiru. If you can offer more, that's fine. But before you do that, you did mention in passing Bob Lazar. I absolutely have to cover this because in my interview with Stanton Friedman, he actually told me Bob is a very bright man, but he isn't telling the truth. Among other things, he said that Bob Lazar could not have attended some of the places he was attending, and that's interesting because on an episode of UFO Hunters on the History Channel, they talked about how they tried to wipe out records of Bob Lazar attending a place that he was actually at. Seems like a contradiction there. And Stanton Friedman also said that the half-life of the element 115 that Bob Lazar said is turned into element 116 and then decays to element 115 to bend and warp space-time to let them travel from Earth to Zeta Reticuli. Stan Friedman said that the half-life of that 115, it's too small, it couldn't last. So, I mean, maybe he's ignoring the fact that maybe the aliens have some technology to keep the element 115 together. But do you believe Bob Lazar is a fraud like Stan Friedman does?
I think Stanton Friedman has a conflict of interests around Bob Lazar because it's above his head. But in saying that, I do not communicate or know Stanton Friedman. I only know him from back in the day. If I dropped a couple names, he'd be like, oh. But I have mad respect for Stanton Friedman because he is an actual nuclear physicist, very rare breed that acknowledges the UFO cover-up. So I definitely think what Stanton Friedman has to say is worthy of merit and consideration, even if I disagree with him. But having said that, I disagree with him because from my side and take, I know people involved with the case with Bob Lazar and John Lear and the events that unfolded in the desert when they chose to start taking people. You know, Bob Lazar rolls up to John Lear's house as a friend, just kind of walks in and John Lear's typing away and Bob's sitting there and he's like, I saw a disc today. And John's like, what? What? I mean, and so this amazing series of events unfolds where Bob Lazar chooses to become public. And, you know, that all happened. And George Knapp with the news in Vegas and anyone who chooses to look into that topic, you know, Area 51 is now, because of that, in a long spiraling of events that even chemical spills and lawyers and things that happened that brought Area 51 on the map, there is a different shifting dynamic happening with that whole topic of, you know, there's a new History Channel show called Hangar 1, and episode 2 covers Phil Schneider, to the depth in the story with Dulce and Phil Schneider that I was like, wow, the climate is changing. That was just on the air, on the same network that I'm on. Wow. So, yes, topics like Bob Lazar, I think, are definitely legitimate, and there's a shifting climate as far as that goes, but there are definitely things, Andrew, that I will say on the air and not, and I'd only whisper to you in a conversation because, yeah, there is, for whatever reason, you know, intelligence and things that have to do with our national security as far as technology. Anything super, super advanced could be used for good or bad. So that's just the world that we live in, unfortunately. If anyone chooses to go too deep into looking for super advanced technology, well, you know, you're not going to probably run into the U.S. government. When you go to sites like Area 51, anything that has to do with very high-level advanced technology, you're not going to hit up, it's not going to be the military there. It's going to be a private security organization that just has authorization to kill you, like Wackenhut Security at Area 51 or various other places. So, yeah, those are very interesting topics when people choose to come out of the woodwork and talk publicly. If I was ever given access like that, I would not talk. I mean, but some people choose to do so.
Yes, and moving on, you want to talk about Nibiru. Before you do, I just want to throw out a couple things about Nibiru for the people that really want to dig deep into the research. It's been said by consciousness and metaphysics experts and researchers that whenever Nibiru appears near Earth, it directly correlates with a high amount of fear on planet Earth, and consequently the Annunaki are actually a malevolent race, and that's why they treated us like a slave species. And Nibiru exists because our consciousness tells us it exists, just like everything exists because our consciousness tells us it exists, and they say Nibiru's appearance is fear-related. And on that note, Andromeda Council contactee Tolek said that there was the conspiracy of sorts that Nibiru would come to Earth around the end of the Mayan calendar, and there were a lot of people that were fearing that, so that might cause our consciousness to make it come. And he said that higher dimensional entities actually put Nibiru high above the orbit of the solar system to keep it from affecting Earth during the 2012 end of the Mayan calendar period. This probably may fall out of the realm of what you've researched, but in regards to Nibiru, what do you know?
I feel sorry for people who listen to your show slightly intoxicated because we're going at such a fast pace with some of these references that you make that I don't want to, like, scare people. They're going to be like, holy crap, the end of the world's coming. No. But I like it, Andrew. This is good. You have such a energetic style of bringing various references that are more mainstream, like cutting-edge UFO stuff. I can't quote contactees or people who are channeling aliens or any of that because I just, you know, I don't know if they're telling the truth or not. But I think it's all interesting, and it's good for people to hear this information, to become open-minded. But I would stress not to let your brain fall out, you know. And I say that in a lovingly way because, you know, when I first started looking into these topics, everyone around me, even my closest family, were like, dude, you need to stay grounded. Like, focus on what matters in life, right? Not all this weird stuff and things flying around. I'm like, I don't think you guys get it. This really does matter. But so my point is that these are very heavy topics. One can choose to quickly go into the deep end looking into these things. But I think it's healthy to take it with a grain of salt. We have senses and we're well aware, and we have connected media today that if anything is happening in our reality, at least in our North America, it will be kind of hard to cover it up if it's a really big event. But having said that, let's go back to the topic of Nibiru. You know, so when I started to, again, look into the Sumerian information and realized that from an academic level, all of their writings and texts are proven with quite a deal of veracity. The other side is they have all of this information that, again, translated through Zachariah Sitchin and a few other scholars who might not agree with the ancient astronaut theory, but point out the idea that they had high levels of knowledge in astronomy, and some of the things that they spoke about make it questionable to understand how they would know this, like the distance between the planets. the literal colors of Uranus and Pluto, giving them names like Mosh C, a bluish green. We didn't know what the outer planets looked like until the late 70s and 80s when we sent the Voyager and Galileo probe out there and took the first color photographs of Pluto and Neptune. And what do you know? They matched the Sumerian descriptions. Now, as amazing as that sounds, I'm going to quite quickly divert for a second just to further prove this point. Other cultures have this type of sacred knowledge. If we go back to Hindu and Vedic texts of the Mahabharata, which we'll come back to later in the discussion, I just want to bring it up now. Again, very accurate knowledge of motions of the solar system, well beyond their means of scientific capability at the time, but somehow being able to tap into spiritual knowledge. These master yogis that recorded things thousands of years ago, we can now look at now and with our science and go, holy crap, they were right. So it's not just the Sumerians. There are many cultures that have knowledge of high technology and movements of the heavens that as our sciences continue to grow, we just further confirm this ancient knowledge. So yes, the Sumerians get very specific in that everything that they know, they say they were taught by the Annunaki. Now the Bible says there was a time when there were giants upon the earth. The Sumerians are talking about that time. And they lived amongst these beings, the Anunnaki. And for whatever reason, the Anunnaki left the Sumerian culture, but in the time that they were there, they recorded information and had a high priest and a scribe write it down. And so we have thousands of these tablets that are literal, like, information from the gods directly written down. And some of these, again, are to, watch certain areas of the sky and things like that, where the priests were making astronomical observations and recorded it over hundreds, in some cases thousands of years. So they get very specific in saying that the gods...
Jason seems to have gone off the air. Let me try to call him and see if I can get him back on here. Jason, I don't know if Jason can hear me. He apparently doesn't know he just got knocked off. But see if somehow, some way I can get him back on. Try to reach him through a Facebook or something. Jason, I don't know if you can hear me, but you have to call in again. You got kicked off the air for some reason. So please call back into the show. I can't hear you. Neither can anybody. Your call has dropped for some reason. Folks, I'm going to go on mute for a moment just to see if I can get Jason back on. Hopefully he will call back in. Hello, area code 313. Can you hear me? Hello.
Hey, yes.
Yeah.
Clearly.
This isn't Jason, is it?
Oh, no, this is Dwight.
Oh, sorry. I don't know if Jason knows that he has been kicked off. You were calling for a question for Jason, right?
Oh, no, I was just listening in, but we're not live, are we?
Well, the problem is he got kicked off the air somehow, and I'm trying to tell him right now that he's got to call back in. I'm going to try to send him a message here, telling him on Facebook here he's got to come back on. Just bear with me here, folks. Well, it's good to know I can hear you, but I do hope Jason will be able to call in again. Caller area code 313. I'm going to have to put you on mute for a moment, just to see if I can work this out. I don't know why Jason isn't calling back in, but phone line didn't go dead. Jason Martell, you have been kicked off the air. Could you please call back into the show? The call-in number 646-478-4747. You got kicked off a couple minutes ago. I need you to call back in, please. Please call in at 646-478-4747. I cannot hear you. Your call has dropped. Yeah, this is quite suspicious. It usually doesn't take this long for someone who got kicked off the air to not call back in. This is kind of abnormal. Just tried calling the number that he was calling in on. Just directs me to some other number that doesn't seem to be working. So. Folks, I don't really know what to tell you here. I'm going to stick around here, and hopefully Jason will call back in somehow, some way. Let me try contacting him through Gmail. Jason Martell, if you are there, please call into the show. You are not on the air. You got kicked off unexpectedly, and I'm still here and can hear you. Jason, please call back in. This was quite Hello, area code 313. I might as well talk to you. What's up?
Yes, this is not Jason. It's you had picked me up last time. I did have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry about that. I just wanted to get this whole thing, try to straighten this out, but go ahead, ask your question. Maybe I can answer it.
Yes, have anybody have claimed to live the past lifetime of some of these ancient astronauts that you or Jason is aware of? I know he's not here at the moment to answer that, but that's my question for tonight.
Can you repeat your question? You confused me. Who thinks they're ancient astronauts?
Well, I was wondering if y'all ever came into contact with anybody who believes that they lived the past life as one.
Oh, well, actually, Jason is right back on the air. Why don't you ask him? Hopefully he won't get kicked off this time. Jason, it's glad to see you back. Do you have any idea why you got kicked off?
No, that's kind of odd.
Oh, maybe the NSA is watching us and didn't want you to say what you were about to say. Well, okay, I'm just screwing around with you. But anyway, there's a caller on the show right now who has a question for you. So why don't you answer his question, and then you can get back to what it is you were talking about.
Sure. Caller,
all right, caller, go ahead.
Wow. Whatever you were talking about, that would be, I would like to really know what that was about. My question is, have you ever came into contact with anybody who believes that they lived as a past lifetime as one of the astronauts?
In the sense of astronauts, meaning like someone not from here, or can you be more specific?
Yes, the ancient astronauts.
Right.
Do you
well,
research?
You know, that's the thing. For me, I can't use that as a resource to cite in my research. I have to have physical evidence. It needs to be an artifact, a text, a person that says it's buried there. Go look. Anyone who's channeling information or says they lived a past life, while I respect a lot of people, great people in this field, I'm not going to drop names, who claim to have had a past life, I, as a resource, can't use any of the data that they would say they know from a past life as evidence, just because we have no way to put that into a way to quantify and prove it. I hope that makes sense.
I can't wait till that happens where we can have the proof. And
it will come. It will come, and let me give you a quick answer on that, which is a funny analogy. Is, you know, let's say in the middle of Beverly Hills, all of a sudden a bright light opens up over Wilshire Boulevard, and all of a sudden there's this man with dark brown hair and a beard in robes, and he's on a cloud, and he's glowing, and he slowly is descending, you know, into the middle of Beverly Hills, and it's Jesus. People are like, it's Jesus. Now, people would freak out. People would start freaking out, and the first thing that would happen is that our society would say, well, let's analyze the atmosphere around Jesus. What is it that's allowing him to descend like that without gravity? What type of cloth is he wearing? Let's get a sample. You know, we would want to take a scientific view to describe what we're seeing to try and verify it, right? We wouldn't just go, it's Jesus. We would be like, wow, it looks like Jesus. This is unbelievable. Let's take samples and verify, right? So that's the approach that we take today, is our sciences have to be able to prove things. The bummer there, our sciences are not complete. We are still figuring things out. So it is definitely a process of discovery, and you know, we can talk about that more in the next hour here.
Okay, yes. And it will be more than science, I believe. We'll learn the science of having people being able to learn these things themselves. That way, once the technology can detect spiritual energy, which the Russians kind of did, and then with that, it will be like a tool, like a classroom tool for people to like detect it with their own, kind of like their spiritual and material eye.
You're more right than you know.
That way.
You know, look, one of the things that just happened in 2012, actually coinciding with the Mayan calendar, instead of looking at it as a negative, it's the end of the world, maybe it's a change, a huge change. And in 2012, there's something called the Hadron Collider. It's a huge particle accelerator that smashes things together and looks at things at a subatomic level. The Hadron Collider is theoretically now is believing that there's something called the Higgs boson or the Higgs singlet. And these are theoretical particles that are going to make light speed travel, or the ability for us to speak, let's say, to beings in another universe. I mean, these are scientific facts now coming into fruition now. So, yeah, it's very exciting. Who only knows what our sciences are going to allow us to do within the next 5, 10, or might I even say 25 years.
The end of the material world, I believe. The end of the material world. I can't. Well, the material world is not bad, but the way we live inside the material world, that's kind of like, it's horrible. But yeah, definitely sooner than we think, I believe. I don't believe in
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And I don't believe.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Finish your statement.
I don't believe it's any magical coincidence, but I like to say I learned that I was there before Egypt. I was the one who prompted the Egyptians to stop roaming the desert as nomads and start building a civilization. Just one of them who was in that position, and possibly the founders. So I can't wait till it's proven, because until then it's just talk, right?
I hear you, man. Well, hey, that's definitely an interesting viewpoint, and only time will tell. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot, Area Code 313. Take care now.
All right.
Later. Well, Jason, I'm not exactly sure where we're at. We were on Nibiru, but I don't remember off the top of my head what part of the planet Nibiru you were talking about. Do you know the exact thing you were talking about when you got kicked off?
I've got it. Sure.
Yeah, what was it?
Well, basically, I was just kind of giving the ancient view that the Sumerians were very specific in recording these beings, the Annunaki, and that they came from another planet within our recorded solar system they called Nibiru. So where it gets kind of interesting is going into more of the modern data, and this is where the topic falls beyond the scope of Zecharia Sitchin into a more evolved hypothesis that I support now. The modern search for a Planet X started again in the late 80s and 90s, and there's a great video called "Are We Alone?" with Sitchin in the final precipice of crossover from his ancient knowledge of this and starting to compare it with modern resources. Zecharia Sitchin in the late 80s went on camera at the Naval Observatory and met with the lead astronomer for the naval astronomy community there. And Dr. Robert Harrington, they compared notes where Sitchin was like, well, here's the Sumerian Nibiru. It's got this elongated orbit, goes out about 3,600 years, so it probably travels billions of miles out there, and then loops back somehow, which we'll talk about how it could be looping back. But Dr. Harrington says, well, that's amazing, Sitchin, because here I have this model where I've postulated, you know, again, as the lead naval astronomer, I've postulated a 10th planet where all of the solar system anomalies that we see today, why Uranus is tilted on its side, why Pluto and Neptune are possibly dislodged moons of Saturn, all of the orbital anomalies that are showing something pulling on the planets, and the probes that we send into space are being pulled in one direction. They called it a perturbation. Something is pulling on the planets, an unknown gravitational force, but they never found it. Where is it? What is it? So that model changed from the late 80s and 90s from looking at the perturbations into using infrared space-deployed scopes that are now looking for what we call exoplanets or extrasolar bodies. Started again with the idea that there's a 10th planet. There's something out there affecting the orbit of the planets, period. We don't know what it is. So now we've got all these telescopes out there that have been looking for a Planet X. I've got images on my site from Harvard Astronomical Abstracts that show plates of the solar system where they've been looking in the southern part of the sky for quite a bit of time. Now again, Andrew, people hear all of this. Everything that I'm going to tell you tonight is factual data. It's either written down from an academic source or written down in the Sumerian tablet. You can choose to believe it or not, but I can't use anything that's hypothetical or channeled. I think the amazing information is, again, just in the facts alone. So there is information that this Planet X, the idea of a planet beyond Pluto, 9th planet, the 10th one would be a Roman numeral X, so Planet X, that it does exist. So we started to deploy all these space telescopes, and what happened was, when we flip on all these telescopes, we're like, oh my God, there's hundreds of planets floating out here. What are we going to do? And so they started naming all of these things recently. They demote Pluto, which I don't agree with, and now there's Sedna, Quowar, Xena. These are all balls of ice, in my opinion. They're 800 to 1,000 kilometer radius. They're nothing like the planet described by the Sumerians, which is 4 to 8 times the size of Earth. It's a big planet. We're not going to miss it. but somehow we've been looking for it for the last 15 years. And if anyone looks at my presentations or looks at the data, the media has been well aware of picking up things from various astronomy communities, amateur and professional, around the world, making observations for motions of the solar system. And here's the hard part. All of these planets that they film floating around out there, these brown dwarfs or failed stars, planets that are just balls of ice, you have to then calculate its orbit. So it's very possible we've already filmed Nibiru, but to actually identify it and then calculate its orbit is the hard part. So it is very interesting that all of our new science is looking for planets like ours and doing space detection of planets near us that we might discover, large solar bodies. But here's where the Planet X Nibiru information evolves beyond Sitchin. Every description of Sitchin's translation of the orbit of Nibiru shows it going around one sun. Well, we don't have one sun, folks. More than likely, we're binary. Every solar system that we've been filming, external to ours, 90% of them are binary. Some of them have up to 8 suns. 8! And they're in this intricate dance, orbiting each other, suns orbiting each other. A binary system means 2 suns in orbit around each other. So, Andrew, the information for me has changed because, one, the orbit of Nibiru needs to show a model of it going around 2 suns. And that would explain why it can go billions of miles out in this egg-shaped orbit and still loop back around. It's looping around something else. Now, the whole idea of Nibiru going around 2 suns is, again, well documented in research from some of these people that really aren't calling it Nibiru. They give it different names. If you Google the word Nemesis, Dr. Richard Mueller from Berkeley, he postulated a planet called Nemesis that orbits around 2 suns. But way out where the second sun would be, we have what's called the Oort cloud. And again, this is a scientific accepted term, the Oort cloud. It's a huge asteroid belt, billions of miles beyond Pluto. Something possibly orbits through the Oort cloud and dislodges debris and comets and things from there and brings it periodically to the inner part of our solar system. Dr. Mueller theorized that's what caused the dinosaur extinction. And that's why we see our moon and our planet and various other planet surfaces bombarded by debris, wax from asteroids and comets. Something very large passing through the inner part of our solar system like another planet, it's going to have gravitational effects on debris and bring it along with it, and that whacks us. So there is theories out there about another planet orbiting 2 suns. Well, here's where it gets really interesting and goes well beyond Sitchin and Nibiru and conspiracies. Gets kind of deep, actually. There are over 30 cultures on Earth that are aware of 2 suns. There's a book called Hamlet's Mill. Anyone can Google it, Hamlet's Mill. Over 30 cultures were somehow aware of this dual orbit. The Mayans were aware of it. That's why they had a calendar system so accurate and advanced and encompassed such a large scale of time that we just don't understand. Well, I'm starting to figure it out. Other scholars understand, and we're looking into this. The term right now is called the precession of the equinox. And that simply means that we have the heavens divided into 12 parts as constellations. Right now we're in the age of Pisces. It's the symbol of a fish. Now people slap it on the back of their car in honor of Jesus and such, but they might not realize that the symbol of the fish actually means Pisces, and it's an astronomical symbol for the age that we're currently in, the age of Pisces. What that means is that many ancient cultures used a grand celestial clock where they watched the movements of the heavens and used these 12 zodiacal symbols to know where we were in a 24,000-year cycle. Right now, the precession of the equinox on scientific terms means that there's a degradation of our orbit and that it takes 26,000 years for this effect to take place. That's an inaccurate number. It's 24,000 years. We move through each zodiacal age for every zodiacal age, there's 12 of them. It lasts 2,000 years, so it's a 24,000-year cycle. But the kicker of this, Andrew, and I'm going to take a pause here and we can talk about this, but the kicker of this is all of the ancient cultures were aware of this grand cycle. Plato called it the Great Year. We're just learning it now. People are just going to understand what I'm telling you. You've heard of the Golden Age. You've heard of the Dark Ages. Well, this is a cyclical pattern here on Earth that lasts 24,000 years, and it coincides with our binary orbit. When our two suns are at their closest point in their orbit, we're in the Golden Age. The sun energy, something, causes us to literally come to a point where we can interpret God, as it's talked about by these ancient Hindus. When the suns are at their farthest point, we're in the Dark Ages. We forget everything. No more interaction with the gods, no more higher understandings. We're just killing everybody like Game of Thrones on HBO, which I love. So I'm going to pause there, but I want you to understand that this is what I'm going to tell you in the ending part of tonight's show, is that all the monuments around the Earth point to star constellations that mark where they are or were in a 24,000-year cycle of time. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I have no doubt astrology is a real science. I do not believe it is quackery. There is something to astrology. Even though I don't read horoscopes, I believe there is truth behind how as above, so below. But one thing I want to get into, but I don't want to elaborate on this in great detail and go into conversation about it, but since you mentioned the second sun, it has been talked about by, among other people, ET contactees Alex Collier and George Kavasilis, that there is actually a second sun in the solar system, but it's not the nemesis that you mentioned. It's actually a small star that orbits exactly opposite the sun from where Earth is, and that's why we can't see it, because it orbits at the same speed as the Earth and us on the exact opposite side. And Kavasilis has explained that this second sun is actually a balance, metaphysically speaking, of the male energies. Like the sun is male energy, and this second sun is also a male energy, and this directly correlates with the male energy balance of Enlil and Enkidu, which I know you're familiar with in the work of Sitchin. Don't want to talk about this much. It completely falls out of the realm of the conversation, but it's worth throwing out. And it's also worth throwing out that Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis says that there are actually 66 planets in the solar system. Make of that whatever you will. But moving on, I want to get into the subject of ancient aliens and why I said I have a love them, hate them relationship with that show. I mean, I believe the show is very accurate for the most part in terms of explaining points in history where extraterrestrials did actually influence reality on Earth. But the problem with I have is they're not actually doing a very good job of explaining who the aliens are and what their true intentions are. And another problem I have with the show is a lot of the things that they say in religious texts, they say that those things in religious texts like the Bible and other religious sources are actually true events. I am of the opinion that malevolent aliens from the past, and I'm going to ask you a question about this in a moment, malevolent aliens from the past invented like religions as a form of brainwashing humanity, and a lot of the religious stories that ancient aliens passes off as true are actually fictional stories that malevolent aliens want us to believe are true. Now, I'm going to let you talk about this for a moment, but I want to get into why. One reason I believe it disinforms in regards to the extraterrestrials and their intentions. I am 100% convinced that David Icke is right when he says that many of our political and corporate leaders are actually malevolent reptilian aliens who holographically masquerade as humans so they can manipulate our reality in negative ways to feed off of our fear energy. And I also subscribe to the notion that malevolent gray aliens from Draco, excuse me, not from Draco, that's where the reptilians come from, but Orion and Zeta Reticuli is where the grays come from. They're in allegiance with the reptilians, and since the History Channel show Ancient Aliens, like maybe on only 2 occasions, actually mentioned reptilian aliens and only 1 occasion mentioned shape-shifting, I'm thinking that the show is, in a sense, a bit of a disinformation campaign in that regard. So what do you have to say about this stuff I've just said about Ancient Aliens being a love 'em, hate 'em show?
I love you, man, but you sound like a raving lunatic.
Oh, okay. Well, what people think
answer.
about me is none of my business, so I'm not afraid to talk about this stuff publicly because I don't care.
I mean that in the most like show-worthy way, and not like if I was in your face. Because look, Andrew, we can both take our own approach on this information. I sit from a more grounded view of, hey man, show me the money, versus everyone under the sun who claims to know something in these areas or is channeling something or has a piece of the information that they might have heard from something else and now connected it with something and now has something to say. I take a more patient approach. So I actually really like your pace because it's a complete dichotomy of difference in how I would discuss or even approach anything around these topics. But everything that you're saying, there's someone else out there going, yeah, man, yeah, I know there's a cover-up. I know this is going on. And I'm not going to disagree with you, but I have to take a more pragmatic, logical approach, right? So, you know, a lot of these things that, you know, when you mention, is Ancient Aliens a cover-up or is it a disinformation campaign? Well, let me give you an example. Dude, it's a business. These people have a budget from the History Channel to produce a show, right? If they talked about reptilian aliens in 15 shows, it'd be canceled. So there's not always a cover-up or some devious reason for why some things are the way they are. And again, having said that, though, are there people in body-shifting parts of our government that are aliens? Or, you know, I really don't know. I don't put it outside the realm of possibility. But as far as something I can prove or point to say, how do I move the needle in human knowledge in these topics? Man, I don't think it's all of that stuff. It needs to be facts and evidence so that people can make up a logical decision on for themselves. Now, if someone wants to dive into the deep end of paranormal and cover-ups and aliens and everything, that's fine. You might get a kick out of something I just posted on my Facebook about 10 minutes ago, which is from 10, 15 years ago when I was on the set of NBC's Confirmation with Whitley Strieber, Dr. Lear, Daryl Sims, and it was recreating an alien abduction event. And I'm literally manipulating the alien in the bedroom. I go way back with my UFO people and understand the whole involved real events of being involved in abduction or, you know, having experiences that are paranormal. But people can choose to go into the deep end with this stuff and get carried away with stuff that doesn't help move the needle. So I just, in a friendly way, want to say that I like what you're saying because you're, you know, a host and, man, you've got a lot of points to cover. But, dude, I don't take this stuff lightly. I do this for a reason. I want to move the needle. So everything that I say and everything that I'm going to point out is going to be not just hearsay. I will stand by it 110%. Okay. So having said that, I'd love to continue on, if that'd be okay, about this lost cycle of time and kind of further go into that, unless there's a couple other questions you'd like for me to discuss before I go into another tangent of rambling on my own.
Oh, I'd like you to go into that, but before we do that, there are a couple of things from antiquity that I just quickly want to cover.
Sure.
The pyramids from ancient Egypt. It appears that Orion is the constellation that they were trying to mimic. Andrew Collins did do some research to suggest that it actually models the constellation of Cygnus, the swan, and a woman named Lisa Renee also said that the pyramids were there to symbolize something involving the Sirius constellation, but it seems that Orion is really the one what it was about. And I remember on one episode of Ancient Aliens, they talked about this guy who I think he spun a pyramid, and the pyramid pointed to Orion, and even though you don't talk in regards to what people said that they were ancient astronauts back in antiquity, that E.T. contactee I mentioned earlier, George Cavazos, he talked about how the pyramids were, metaphysically speaking, put on Earth to anchor the male energy to the Earth from the constellation Orion, because that's astrologically, metaphysically speaking, where the male energy dominant area of the sky comes from. So do you agree that the pyramids are Orion-based?
I definitely do. I definitely believe that they're Orion-based. The facts behind that connection that might have been extrapolated to other views is the fact that we can use star charting and constellation software, Redshift, and various other free programs where you can, you know, download to your iPad and know what is going to be above your in your sky view at night. So where the constellations are going to be related to you. So let's say I wanted to see where the Orion constellation is going to be tonight above my home in Southern California. Using software, I can say, oh, look, it's going to be right out 100 degrees to the left of the west view, right? But I can also say, well, where is it going to be a week from now or 10,000 years ago? It's all simulated mathematics that we can run. And so when we run these programs, it turns out that in the year 10,500 BC, the Orion constellation is literally emulating right above the three stars of the three pyramids of Giza. So at 10,500 BC, the Sphinx is looking directly east into the constellation of Leo, which is a lion. The three pyramids on the ground are perfectly aligned right below the three stars of Orion in the sky. It's literally as if the three pyramids are a terrestrial map of Orion in the sky. But that alignment takes place in 10,500 BC. The Egyptians were supposed to have been around and built the pyramids at 2,500 BC. There are other areas in Egypt like Dendera, the Dendera zodiac. Again, this huge wall relief depicting the sky, but it shows the sky at 8,000 BC. Somehow they made a relief of what the sky looks like thousands of years from when they were supposed to have been here at 2,500 BC. Now, either they did that with some advanced knowledge that was passed to them, or their culture just goes back a lot further than we think, and the pyramids were not built at 2,500 BC, but much older. Last point, if we look at the inner walls of the Sphinx, there's massive erosion by water. The inner walls of the Sphinx show massive erosion by water, running water. There has been no running water on the Giza Plateau for 10,000 years. So yeah, that's my opinion on the pyramids. But that also I'm going to let you ask another question, but that definitely ties into what we're talking about as to why there are monuments that align to a constellation where this alignment will repeat, but it's over such a large scale of time, we have a difficulty understanding it.
Okay, and one more thing I want to get into in regards to evidence from antiquity before you get into that other thing you wanted to discuss, the Baghdad battery. Now, yeah, there's electrical charge from that, but I have to play a little skeptic for a moment because the Baghdad battery seems like one of those things, well, oh, you just found a way to make this generate an electrical charge. It's just a funny little coincidence that you discovered this. This does not imply that this thing was used for some electrical purpose in antiquity. If you believe otherwise, can you back up your claim that the Baghdad battery really does have some mechanical purpose to it?
The two academic views are actually quite interesting before we get into the alternative view. First academic view is they used the Baghdad battery to electroplate jewelry. So they could literally heat up gold or silver using this small electrical charge and then spray the gold or the silver over an amulet or a necklace. So that was kind of interesting. The other idea was they would connect it to a statue. So they would make much larger versions of the version I tested on camera, which I still have a couple of versions that I keep here at home. The Baghdad battery replica is simply, allowed me to get about 4 volts on camera. So the other view is that they use this in a larger scale where they would make one like the size of a 6-foot vase and plug it into a huge statue. So as you go into a certain church, you would see this large statue of a god, and they would, by hooking this, Baghdad battery and creating an electric charge through it, you would notice kind of like a hum. You'd come up to the statue and you'd feel it kind of like got a hum to it, and when you touch it, you'd get static electricity. And so you'd be like, oh, it's the power of the gods. So they literally used it as one way to attract people as a technology, to attach it to a statue and create a static charge. Or they used it to electroplate jewelry and spray fine gold or silver. Very interesting in both rights. The alternative view is that that same type of a vase is found all over Egypt, large vases, and they're connected in one place, in the same area where there's this diagonal thing on the ceiling, Dendera light bulb. Anyone can Google Dendera light bulb. In there, at Dendera, there's a certain crypt called the area of the light-giving source. mean, no joke. And on the walls in this crypt, there are large reliefs carved into the wall of what appear to be Egyptians holding light bulbs. Literally, a large light bulb, and it's plugged into this, what appears to be a reactor or some type of, power grid, something that you would see today to harness energy or an electrical current. So those same reliefs of them holding up a light bulb are in the same time frame, 2500 BC, of when these Baghdad batteries were being used. They found about a dozen of them in Iraq. So why not have a light source as well as a power source? The interesting thing, too, about these Dendera light bulbs is, I actually created one on camera, a recreation of it, and it does function. If you think of swamp gas, we've heard misidentified UFO sightings by swamp gas, right? It's like some little electrical charge over methane, and it just creates a buzz of light. Why can't the Egyptians just take some swamp gas from the Nile, methane, put it into a glass-filled filament, and introduce a light current using a Baghdad battery, and you create luminescence? I have a working model downstairs in my living room.
Awesome. Since you wanted to get into that subject of, I think it was cycles, you said, by all means, let's get into that. I think you said it was about cyclical stuff. Talk about what that was.
Right. So, well, the latest thing that I've been looking into is, again, I spent many years, 10 years, looking into Nibiru and the Planet X and going through various thousands of different tablets. And anyone can just Google Sumerian artifacts, and they bring up my site, xfacts.com/ancient. And it's, a whole collection of Sumerian artifacts. But, I've been looking into this topic for a long time, and really this new view of two suns changes the model, not only for Nibiru, because it has to loop around two suns, but the whole idea that there is a rise and fall of civilization here on Earth based on astronomical movements. This is very heavy. So most of the ancient cultures somehow knew this. And to put it into perspective, there are two smaller cycles, astronomical cycles, that have an effect on us. And I want you to understand what they are so that this makes sense when I talk about this larger cycle. The first cycle is we're spinning on our axis. Earth is spinning on its axis. And because of that, we have day and night. Just because of the spin of its axis, it causes day and night here on Earth. It gets dark out, plants close up, we go to sleep, we go into a subconscious state because of an astronomical movement. Cycle 2, we're going around the sun. And as we orbit the sun, 365 days, the seasons change, it gets hot, it gets cold, animals migrate, stuff happens because of an astronomical movement. Things are affected here on Earth because of an astronomical movement. So all of the ancients say that there's a third cycle, but this movement is a 24,000-year cycle. It's not easy in our 100-year lifespan to understand or comprehend these changes, but a 24,000-year cycle. So imagine we have two suns and they're orbiting each other. And I'm going to get to the science as to why I'm saying this and to the massive money and budget that's been put into looking into this data. The idea that we have two suns would mean that a binary orbit is two suns orbiting each other. If our sun is orbiting another sun, our sun is moving through space. We're going along for the ride because we orbit our sun. That's a whole idea to understand the perspective of change from what we see in space in these 12 constellations of the zodiac. Why our view of the heaven changes over time. The current model says it's a lunar solar wobble. The Earth has a wobble, and there's about 2,000 plus variables to calculate torque, motion, wobble, to explain the precession of the equinox. Well, a new model with about 11 variables is based on a binary orbit. Much more accurate, much more simple. Everything points to the idea that ever so simplistic is always the answer. There's a company called the Binary Research Institute. I'm fortunate enough to have this gentleman as a business partner, Walter Cruttenden, who looks into this, the binary orbit. Now, there's several other scholars that look into this. Graham Hancock, Robert Bouval, many great scholars that we look to on more of the academic side are aware of these lost civilizations. Dr. Robert Schoch. Many of these people are aware that civilization goes back much further than we think. So it's a very interesting thing to realize that our sciences are possibly going to confirm within our lifetime we're in a binary orbit. This orbit is tied to the rise and fall of our civilization here on Earth. I don't understand it yet completely, but what I'm starting to see is a pattern. All of these ancient sites all over Mesoamerica, the Aztecs, the Mayans, Machu Picchu, Teotihuacan, Pumapunku, there's sites all over the Earth that align to points in space as astronomical markers to pinpoint where that civilization was. Something happened during these certain alignments where they built these monuments to align to certain constellations, or as an example, Chichen Itza in Mexico, they have this, at a certain time of the year, a shadow of a serpent appears down the side of a pyramid. The pyramid was built in such a way to catch the shadow that it creates a serpent based on the shadow. It's amazing. This is all done with unbelievable precise knowledge of astronomical movements. Everyone in the ancient times seems to have known this. So the kicker for me, Andrew, is this. We've heard of things like Atlantis. Some had lost advanced culture that must have existed, but they sunk into the ocean. No. If there was an advanced culture, they would have been all over the Earth. And that's exactly what we're starting to find, thankfully through shows like Ancient Aliens. But we're starting to find new locations and go beyond the normal academic route. Rapa Nui, these Moai heads on Easter Island, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Bada Valley in Indonesia, all of the most ancient sites that we're starting to uncover. It's not a complete civilization like the Sumerians. It's bits and pieces that we're finding, but it's pushing the needle back. But at all of these sites, Andrew, we're seeing a certain type of being that is being depicted. The Moai heads on Easter Island, they're not heads. They've dug out around the heads. They're all long, slender beings. Same beings depicted at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Same beings in Bada Valley in Indonesia. Same beings in Mesoamerica. Even the Sumerians depict these type of beings. I think that there is some lost ancient civilization that might have had much more advanced understandings of technology that we have today, probably because they're from the Golden Age or a time when, in this large cycle of time, they were much more advanced. But we're just starting to uncover them, and it seems that this lost ancient culture influenced all the great ancient cultures we have today. Mesoamerica, Egyptian, Sumerian, African, all of them seem to have pieces of this technology and understanding of astronomy that speaks of a time that they didn't even, all of our ancient cultures are just getting a piece of the information from this lost civilization that we're just starting to uncover. So it's really interesting, Andrew, because we're starting to see that the reason why these monuments, these megalithic sites all over the Earth, align to constellations that point to an understanding of this large celestial clock, a breakdown of the heavens into zodiacal symbols, a 24,000-year cycle that repeats. So we don't necessarily start from somewhere really dumb in the past and are going to continue to get smart. It's a cyclical cycle. And some of the most ancient Vedic and Hindu texts speak of this knowledge. And now our sciences are starting to confirm this spiritual information that they somehow downloaded from the universe. These ancient Hindu rishis and seers and people that could tap into this sacred knowledge just by meditating, they wrote it all down thousands of years ago. And what do you know? Our sciences are confirming the fact that we're binary and that there is this larger cycle of time. So I'll pause there for a moment.
Yes, just so you know, we have about 11 minutes left. One thing I want to point out quickly, in regards to what you said about the Earth going along through space with the sun and the view of the zodiac, I just want to throw this out. Don't want to discuss it just want to throw it out, though. It has been mentioned by some people like Santos Bonacci and also this guy named Vahat, V-H-A-T, and you can see this on a YouTube video called Solar System New Interpretation, which says that the solar system is actually shaped like a cone, meaning that at the top of the traffic cone at the point is the sun, and all the planet, if you were to draw a straight line from the sun down through the center of the cone as it widens going downward, each planet does not actually orbit the sun. It actually orbits the imaginary stick as you go down the cone, and Mercury has the smallest circumference in its orbit because it's the closest up to the top of the cone, and then you keep going down, and then you would go through all the 66 planets I mentioned. That's kind of contradictory, though, to what the Sumerian tablets might suggest about Nibiru orbiting into the Earth's orbit, because if it was truly cone-shaped, then they would stay in the cone and not go up towards the Earth. I mean, that might be something people might want to consider researching, but Santos Bonacci claims the laws of physics say that the solar system should be shaped like that, and the fact that it's moving through space. But we're not really going to get into that. I just want to point that out, though. But Giorgio Tsoukalos, your colleague on Ancient Aliens of sorts, he made a very interesting contradictory statement. He contradicted himself, and I just want to get your comments on this because it was quite interesting. Giorgio said in one episode of Ancient Aliens, a race of aliens that want to travel, that can go across the universe and have built that kind of sophisticated technology would not want to enslave us and be harmful to us. They would be benevolent and try to teach us things. But in another episode of Ancient Aliens, Giorgio contradicted himself. He said, if you were a higher power entity on another planet and you had and you were overseeing a bunch of other beings that are not as sophisticated as you are in terms of technology and consciousness, you're not going to let them do what they want. You're going to say, you're going to listen to us or else. I'm sure we all see the contradiction in Giorgio's statements there, but I think it's pretty significant because Giorgio did also say it's not all hunky-dory out there. There's a balance, a yin and yang balance between good and evil. So now that I've made it clear that Giorgio did contradict himself, but yet he seems to understand why he's contradicting himself, can you offer any statements on that whole thing?
No, I can't. Everything that you just said was a third person. If I conference Giorgio in right now and asked him to comment, that would be more appropriate. But why would you even ask me to comment on something that someone else has said, like I'm going to know or memorize it? The only thing I can say about Giorgio Tsoukalos, man, is that I've known him for 20 years, and I met him when he was wearing a three-piece suit and his hair was slicked back, and he was the assistant for Eric von Daniken. Not even assistant, he pretty much right hand. And now I wear the suit, my hair's slicked back, and he's got some crazy hair, and he's super famous. Giorgio knows what he's talking about and has been around the block and has done his research. If someone says something out of context, that doesn't mean that they're inaccurate or they don't know what they're saying. People just need to make up their own decision based on your opinion, my opinion, and anyone else they choose to listen to.
Yeah, I've no doubt Giorgio knows what he's talking about. The reason I was asking this was because I was, in a sense, trying to get you to either admit or deny, based on your perspective on the yin and yang balance between good and bad extraterrestrials and how they are influencing reality on Earth. Like I said, I believe in evil Draco-reptilians and Greys from Orion and what that, but I also believe that there are guardian angels and spirit guides that are higher dimensional beings of like crystalline bodies and light that are watching over us and protecting us. And I did mention Tolek, the contactee of the Andromeda Council, and he's not the only contactee, and good will always trump evil, as the saying goes, because there is such a thing as karma. But in general, can you agree, yes, there is obviously a mix between good and bad ETs influencing our reality, and have been since maybe even before Atlantis?
Most definitely. Yin-yang, black-white, day-night, of course, that makes an extreme logical sense. And the way I view the whole mixing pot of our reality and ufology and cover-ups is, you know, if there is a galactic federation of planets, Star Wars, Star Trek, intelligent species that come together and make decisions for the better whole, if they're looking at us, they see us blowing up the planet, killing each other, what are they going to do giving us more technology? No. It almost appears that they're making just pushes, subtle pushes for us to make these decisions for ourselves so that hopefully we can rejoin this galactic community as we become more spiritually aware and evolve, probably due to this cycle of evolution that I mentioned earlier. So Yeah.
Yeah, that is the case, and we got about 6 minutes left. So one thing I wanted to touch on quickly, in my interview with Stan Friedman, I discussed with him whether or not he subscribes to the notion that the majority of UFOs, like UFOs are military and industrial complex, they are other ETs, and some of them are hoaxes, but there is a percentage factor here because they're not all of just one variety. And in my interview with Australian ET contactee George Cavazos, he said the majority of UFOs that we see are of a malevolent nature because they belong to the military-industrial complex. He didn't really specify to what extent of those are actually just military human-like technology and which ones have ET connections to them. But Stan Friedman seemed to not really go along with that. Stan said, well, I have no doubt there's a government cover-up with ETs, but I don't really subscribe to the notion that those UFOs belong to the military, because if they did, they would have used them in the wars. Now, I beg to differ on that, because I think that if the aliens are controlling the same governments all over the world, they wouldn't use their own technology in the countries that they're puppeting through both sides of the wars, so it kind of makes sense that they wouldn't use that technology in the wars. Would you believe that most of the UFOs are or are not part of the military-industrial complex?
I'll go into a little bit of the deeper conspiracy side for my answer here, but this is, again, just my personal opinion. My personal opinion is that all of the ancient gods that we hear about, like Kukulkan and the Annunaki and various Enki and Anu and Enlil and both brothers, whether they both like this or not. Point is that it appears that in ancient times, man had open interaction with these beings and considered them gods. We don't have open interaction with them anymore, and I personally think it's because there are bad aliens in control of the planet. I'm going to keep it real Twitter-like in my answer for this, but yeah, I personally believe that the bad aliens, if you will, are in charge and are working with the military-industrial complex, giving them technology and doing things. And I base this based on the fact that going over the last 50 years of the cover-up, if anyone looks into what's been going on, Adamski and various other people, weird stuff that points to the fact that the aliens literally tried to have treaties with us and said, look, we're going to take some of your people and we'll give you some technology. Cool. But then they started to take more than we could want them to as far as our people, and there's nothing we could do about it, and a whole weird, mix of events from us collaborating with these various species and sharing technology or deciphering their technology. We're not in control, for sure. So beyond that, Andrew, I can't give you anything other than my further opinion, because yes, I believe that these things are happening, and I deduce this based on information I take in. But what I can prove and talk about to move the needle of our understanding of these topics will always shift back to facts and evidence, because that's all I have. Unless I had like an alien or a UFO and I'd be like, here it is. But that's just, not a possibility right now for me. So.
All right, we got 3 minutes left, so we might as well cover one more subject, crop circles. In that same interview I did with George Cavazos, he explained that some crop circles are alien technology, some are human technology with technology that's kept out of the public arena, and some crop circles are actually caused by planet Earth, because every planet has its own consciousness, therefore it does have the ability to create crop circles. He said that the majority of crop circles are actually made by extraterrestrials, either malevolent or benevolent, who are trying to guide humanity in a particular direction. That may sound silly, but for those of you that don't understand metaphysics, a symbol projects an energy. If it's a love symbol, it will project good, benevolent energy. If it's a bad symbolism, it will project malevolent energy. So the way a crop circle looks, even though you may not recognize it at a conscious level, at a subconscious level, it does affect you in either a good or a bad way. And that is what he meant when he said that the majority of crop circles are meant by aliens who want to guide humans at a subconscious metaphysical level in a particular direction. In 2 minutes, can you confirm or deny your beliefs on that?
I can do it much quicker than that. I don't give any relevance to crop circles. They're not on my radar whatsoever.
All right, that's perfectly understandable.
But I will use this last time, if you'd allow me to.
Go ahead.
Briefly tell how other people can further look into what I've brought to the table tonight. And I actually have a little bonus for your audience, If they go to ancientbonus.com/radio, ancientbonus.com/radio, they'll get a free video lesson from me and a copy of one of my books, Ancient Alien Artifacts, like a preview version. But that'll give you a little bit of insight into what I've launched, which is a service called Ancient School, where I am teaching people about these topics that you see on Ancient Aliens and some of the things I talked about tonight. But it's a more in-depth look into these topics through Ancient School. And once you sign up, each week you get a new video lesson taught by me or other top experts that'll kind of take you through the ancient astronaut theory. So for tonight, if you just go to ancientbonus.com/radio, you can kind of get a peek into that world and what we research.
Okay, I guess we might as well end it on that note. And Jason, with that being said, I'm going to tell you the same thing I tell all of my guests. Love to have you on again, but it probably won't happen.
Sure.
Because my goal on this
I'd love
show,
to come back on.
Well, my goal on this show is to try to get as many different people on the show as possible before I start giving any one specific guest double dips, because there's a lot of fascinating individuals on planet Earth who can cover a wide array of things that will expose the true nature of reality, and there's a lot of other people that need some glory on my show. So if I if I don't contact you soon, well, now you understand why, because I'm trying to get a lot of other people on. So it was great having you on. I love to cover aliens, and I choose not to just look at straight-up smoking gun evidence. I like to speculate. If you beg to differ with me on that one, that's perfectly understandable. We can't cover everything in this